This is Mayor Rahm Emanuel on Chicago Stories. It's a podcast of people that make up our beautiful city. We're with Fritzie. Can you? You're looking at me. Can you hear me, Fritzie?
I can hear you.
Okay. I've nenever been accused of not being able to be heard, ever.
So I've never done this before, so you have to clue me in.
Oh, just think of it as a conversation.
Yeah.
So
I'm Fritzie Fritzshall, and I'm here at the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center.
Suze, you want to do that introduction? Go ahead. We don't have to, but go ahead.
Sure. Susan Abrams, CEO at Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center. And we're so glad to welcome you here today.
Well, thank you. We're actually having this interview on the 75th anniversary of the Warsaw Uprising. But Fritzie, I've talked to you many times, or also heard you speak at not just the Holocaust dinner, but other events. So you're from a small town in Czechoslovakia. But in the reading, I just want people to, what was your first sense when the Nazis were coming, or your understanding when things changed, and how did you feel that? And then I try to give people a sense of that change, because it's not fundamental. It's not like you got picked up, moved to Auschwitz, but how did that evolution of degradation happen, if that's a fair way to say it?
We lived in a very small town in Czechoslovakia. We lived in we were about 7 kilometers next to a big city, which was Munkac. Mm-hmm. And so we were able to walk to the big city. Even though we were small town people, we knew what was happening in a big city. Mm-hmm. So what year did your father leave for the States and for Chicago specifically? I don't know what year my dad came to this country. I have none of his papers. The only paper I have is when he became a citizen, an American citizen. But before my dad passed away, somebody cleaned out his apartment, and I have absolutely no history. I just know that he came. And you know, when I came here, I came to a stranger. I had absolutely no memory of my father. I didn't even remember what he looked like. I had one memory where he held my brother up on a small porch we had, and he sort of held him up. And I remember he was in a uniform. I don't know if it was a Czech uniform or a Hungarian uniform, but that was the only memory I had. So when I came to this country, I really came to my father, who was a stranger to me, who never raised me.
As I heard you talk before, and I think it's important for people on this anniversary to hear the story, you have talked about when you came there, some soldier said to you, or somebody said to you as you're getting off the train, when you arrived in Auschwitz, say that you're 15, and that you have many people along your time from 1942 to 45 that save your life. If you could recount not by name, but these incidents, whether it was that person that told you when you say that your age is 15, not 13, why that was, the person you ran into, your aunt, if I'm not mistaken, and then the 599 mothers as you described them. But there are milestones of people that save your life.
I think I was one of the lucky ones. Even during those darkest days, there were good people that tried to help other people. And the first, of course, was when we were getting off the train in Auschwitz, and there were Jewish people, two Jewish men that were trying to take everybody off the train, the bodies, of which my grandfather was one of that died in this boxcar going to Auschwitz.
Are you in the same boxcar with him?
I was in the boxcar with my mother, my 2 younger brothers, extended family, my grandparents. And talking about the boxcar is, I have a tendency to put myself right into this position. So I'm right back in the boxcar, and I'm seeing mothers holding dead babies in their arms from lack of food, lack of air, and lack of water. And many, many, many dying in this boxcar, including my grandfather. So when we came to Auschwitz, the doors opened, and there were 2 men standing in front of each boxcar in uniform. I didn't know who they were at the time, but they were Jews that were brought there before us. Their job was to unload the boxcar. They came onto the boxcar and walked amongst children like myself and kept whispering in Yiddish. You're 15 when you get off. Remember, you're 15. I was 13 when I got on. And so when we got off, I saw the separation. I saw my two younger brothers going with the children, didn't understand the situation, didn't know what was happening. But I knew enough not to go with the children. And so I went and lined up with the adult women where the separation started at that point. And so I stood in line with my mother and other women, and you need to remember what was going on there. There was the fear, the adrenaline, the unknown, the SS people, the guns, the dogs, and the separation, and all this is going on. And so
the chaos.
My mother and I stood in the same line, and then they called age again, and I didn't know. And I told her she was in the wrong line. She went into one line, I stood in another line. When I came to Auschwitz-Birkenau, and I asked when I would see my mother, they showed me the smoke. And I have lived with this all my life. Would she have lived had she been in the same line I was in? I don't know. But it's been something that I've carried with me all my life.
One of the moments I wanted to try to grab to is how you had the sense to listen to somebody that said, say, your age is 15, and you have, and I can only do this from reading, you have all this noise, the train, the screaming, the doors are wide open on obviously the ride to Auschwitz. How you kept your senses about yourself to go with that advice when everything else to 13 you're on your own, you're not 15, and yet you had the judgment to hear his counsel. I mean,
But you know, life is strange. I was young.
I've learned that a lot now in my life, that life is strange. I know that. I'm with you on that.
When we were brought into the camp itself, there was so much going on every single moment that we didn't have time to think. And then I was lucky enough to meet my Aunt Bella, who was my mother's youngest sister, who was taken to Auschwitz before me. And I really consider myself so lucky. She was so hungry and so skinny, head shaved, dirty, as I became after being there the first day. And she sold her daily rations, her little bit of daily ration of bread that she was getting every day, in order to bribe the women in our barracks that I wound up in order to make room for me on that bunk bed, where 8 to 10 women slept on one bunk bed, and we all had to sleep turned the same way. If you sleep spoon fashion, you take up less room and you're warmer, and we were always so cold. So she was the other one that saved my life, and eventually we were separated as she watched me walk towards the gas chambers, and she was put onto a truck to be taken somewhere else, and I survived, but she did not.
Now, my memory from both hearing you in the past but also reading up, at first you didn't recognize her when your aunt came to you. Am I overreading that or remembering that wrong? Because she was so skinny, so emaciated, if she recognized you but not the other way around. Is that? She
stood in front of me, and we just looked and stared at each other for a few minutes, and then she recognized me and called me by name, and I still looked normal, even though, we were hungry already, but she did not look normal. She was living with hunger and disease and lice and all of that. And then she saw me. We had a selection. There were always selections in Birkenau. And our barrack was chosen to go to the gas chambers. And we knew we were going to the gas chambers. And we were at the end of the line, and nobody ever wanted to be the end of the line because there was always punishment. And so she was chosen to be taken onto a truck, and she saw me walking to the gas chambers. Her truck pulled away. When her truck pulled away, 6 of us were cut off from the line and taken onto another truck to do slave labor in an ammunition factory, but she did not know I survived. We learned after the war, someone that was with her in a camp, she was taken into a different camp, and we were told that she survived till the end. But she always knew that I did not survive. That's what she kept talking about, that no one in her family survived. And the day she was liberated, she died. So she saved my life, but couldn't save hers.
I'm going to ask a few questions, and I want to bring the museum into this for a second. Also, you had all what you refer to as your 599 mothers. The 599, I was being quiet, one of the rare times, so just take note of it. You've referred before to the 599 mothers you had. Could you describe what you meant by the 599 mothers? I think it was at a slave labor camp and on the journey to that slave labor camp.
I considered them my mothers. When I was taken into this factory to do slave labor, we were 600 women, 599 that I didn't know I was the 600. When I came there, I came from Auschwitz-Birkenau. I came hungry and cold and beaten up and full of lice, and I thought we had it the worst. Until I came into this factory where I saw of what these women went through. They were skin and bones. They were so hungry. They were so beaten down. And they did slave labor even though they could hardly move at that point anymore. After the day was over, everybody would say, who is going to believe us? Who is going to believe that humanity can do these things to other human beings? Who is going to tell the story and who will live? And so they looked around, and I was the kid. I was the youngest that came there. And the decision was that I was the chosen. I was going to carry the story, and if they could help it, they would help me survive. And so every single night when the rations came, and when I tell you, people think that hunger is dieting, it's not having lunch, it's skipping breakfast, and oh, I'm so hungry, I'm starved. Let me tell you, when you're hungry, it is the pit of your stomach is so bitter and hurts that you'll sell your soul for a crumb of bread. And that's what I did, literally. Every night, 599 women lined up. I extended my hand, and I had 599 crumbs that maybe would have saved their life. Maybe they would have lived another day if they ate that crumb. But they gave it to me. In turn, I stood every night and repeated, if I live, I will carry their story. I will tell the story of what happened, not just here in this factory, but what happened in Auschwitz, what I saw, and what I lived through. And so I often wonder if I sold my soul for those crumbs of bread. But we moved from Main Street to Wood Street. It was going to be 40 years. And I've worked with the U.S. Holocaust Museum before, and I've told my story over and over and over and over in the memory of those 599 women, but also in the name of the 6 million, in the name of 1.5 million babies, and others, innocent people that died during the time of the Holocaust.
What is so interesting to me in that story is that when you read the stories of the Holocaust and first-hand accounts of either Auschwitz, Treblinka, Dachau, you come away, there's an image that people are turned on each other. because they dehumanize you. And yet you've just told a story that 599 people preserved their humanity in the worst of deprivation. And you actually just turned on the head the notion that the camps, while they were horrors, there was still a preservation of humanity because these women picked you.
You know, it is so hard to sit here today this many days later and this many years later and tell the story and retell the story, and it becomes a dream. And I've done this holography that I sat in that chair for 5 days from 8 in the morning till sometimes 8 at night to tell and retell the story, so that when I am no longer here, when we, the survivors, are no longer here, our stories are going to live and our stories are going to go on. And I have to tell you, Mayor Emanuel, that I'm really concerned. I'm concerned of what's happening in the world today. I'm concerned of what's happening in Poland. But I'm concerned about anti-Semitism again. And yes, I've lived through it, and I tell the story, but it doesn't seem to be enough.
Mm-hmm. But there was a period of time, if I want to press this point, there was a period of time where you didn't tell that story.
Yes.
Can you tell why you, I mean, I think I know, but I think it's important for people to hear why. Let me say this. You didn't tell this story before, but you've come full voice, and here with the Holocaust Museum, you've repeated and you've told it so everybody can hear, and I think that's very important. But what was that feeling of holding back, given now that we're in front of you and you've been a force of nature about the Holocaust Museum? What was that switch going from reservation to...
The switch, I think what happened was I always knew that someday I was hiding from myself. I took the story, when I came to this country, I took the story and put it at the bottom of my brain, never to be examined. I couldn't handle it. I couldn't live with it, couldn't handle it. And I remember my father wanted to know about his family, needed to know about his sons, his wife, my mother. And he would question me, and I would say, we're not going to talk about it. And we, the survivors, when we came here to this country, we were told, don't talk about it. Just forget, don't talk about it. And I remember sitting down with my dad and telling him, we're going to talk about this today, but after that, we are not going to talk about this again. I couldn't and wouldn't open the box and couldn't handle it. I couldn't live with it. My family knew I was a survivor. I didn't speak the language at the time, and when I married my husband, he knew I was a survivor, but he respected my privacy at that point until I became a grandmother. My son went to Hebrew school, and he would come home.
Those grandkids will do it to you every time.
Yeah, but I wouldn't speak about it for many years. Till my son came to me and said, Mom, I need to know. Your grandchildren will need to know, and I need to know. And at the time, it was right during the time and after the march when Skokie had, and I believe it was in 78, I don't remember dates, and I joined the group, but they knew I was a survivor when I joined Main Street, but they did not know my story at that point still. And so after he came to me and he said, don't ask for anything. He said, just take a blank film to the museum and have them film you. He said, sign whatever they want you to sign, but tell them that you want a copy of the film after they have filmed your life. And after I've done that, it's sort of, the first interview was terrible, and I came away from the interview and I sat in someone's car and I went hysterical. The floodgates opened up, and I became a survivor that moment after I told the story. When I got into the car, I became the survivor. Up till that point, others were survivors. I wouldn't associate with them. I wouldn't speak to them. because I was not a survivor until I gave my story. And then I said, I have a job to do. I made a promise. They helped me live. I must carry their story, and I must tell the story. And this is what I've done all of these many years. And I often wonder, when am I done? When am I done? When have I repaid? I don't know. I think that I have really, really, really done my job. But maybe they don't think so. But whenever I stand up, whenever I speak, it is in the name and the memory of those skinny, sick women. And then we joined the Death March, and most of them couldn't even walk because they were so sick. So they did, I'm sure they did not survive, but I carry their story.
Susan, speak about the role of the museum on its, I think we're here at 9-year anniversary, and the role you see for the mission of UC for the Holocaust Museum, not just here in Skokie, but for the greater Chicago area and then in the national conversation with the notion of playing a role in memory and learning.
Absolutely. So we are here to honor the memory of our survivors and to use that history and lessons of the Holocaust so people do never forget. So we amplify the voice of our survivors, and we inspire our visitors. We hope each visitor and those we reach beyond our walls to recognize the power of their voices and choices, to stand up to hatred and bigotry, and to be upstanders, as you discussed, instead of bystanders, making a difference, repairing and strengthening our world. But one of the very most important roles is, again, to amplify the voices of the survivors. And so we do that through 60,000 students and educators who come through annually, tens of thousands more we reach beyond our walls, all of the public visitors, as you have noted, law enforcement officers, Chicago Police Department recruits and newly promoted officers, etc. And what Fritzie was alluding to when she talked about sitting for a week and recording her testimony for a hologram is the fact that we have, in partnership with USC Shoah Foundation, worked to record the stories of 15 survivors with this new dimensions and testimony technology that combines custom voice recognition software with a survivor recorded holographically answering thousands of questions, so that right here at the museum today, visitors can come and have a conversation with Fritzie and these others, and that will carry on not just today, but for those generations forward.
I know you're proud of the technology, but I want to ask you, in the history of the last 9 years, when you were assembling a lot of the material, was there one set of documents that came, or a person's story that stands out that you think amplifies the mission of the museum that you have that's unique in the sense of something that comes either from the Warsaw Ghetto or from Auschwitz, or some part that reveals the story that is original material that people should come see?
So we have over 25,000 different artifacts, only a small number of which are displayed in the museum at any one time. But we're actually about to open in July in honor of the museum's upcoming 10th anniversary in this location, although it'll be 40 years since the museum was actually founded. And there's any number of stories. So whether it's Fritzie's, there aren't very many. The artifacts for each person are few, lucky to bring what they can, but there's a one-eyed teddy bear that we will feature. There are recipes that were handed down. There are photographs. There are identity cards. So it's a range of different items, each one of which is so meaningful to that individual and the family.
Fritzie, I want to go back on something. In the camp, you worked in the kitchen, is that correct?
No, I worked in a factory, an ammunitions factory, and my job was putting a little spring into a part that would go onto an airplane. We did work in an ammunitions factory.
And a lot of people don't know this, but say there's different camps within the camp.
I was in one camp. I was in Auschwitz-Birkenau until I was taken out to this factory.
Mm-hmm. But in Auschwitz, where did you work?
In Auschwitz, my job in Auschwitz was to get up every morning, and after we had a cup of black coffee and a tiny, sometimes piece of bread, they would march us out, and they would have us carry huge stones from one side to another side. All the stones, these huge rocks, were sometimes bigger than I was that I had to drag. And so the next day we came and we took them from this side and put them back on that side. It was simply to wear us down and have us do something. There was nothing they never used those stones or those rocks for anything. It was simply to get us out there and wear us down. The gas chambers were working too fast and they were too crowded to get us into at that point.
After the war, it was the Russians that you said liberated the camp, liberated you on the march. Did I read that correctly? You were liberated. How about tell me the story, or tell us the story of how you were liberated, and that if you could, that experience, and then how did you make your way back to your town in Czechoslovakia, that I understand now is part of Ukraine?
My group was liberated by the Russian army. And they put us they created a DP camp, a displaced camp, which they took over a big building, and they gave us the first shower and the first medical attention that we had. And they fed us, and they really gave us nothing else. Mm-hmm. We were in this huge building that became a DP camp for some time. They didn't know what to do with us. They deloused us and just gave us the clothes on our back. We kept asking to go somewhere else. Would they let us out? They wouldn't allow us to leave this particular area. One day I went to them and said, I would like to go back home, and would they allow us to go back home? So they gave us passage to go back home to my hometown. They gave me nothing but the train fare to go back to my hometown, which was in Klučarki. I came home hoping that my brothers had survived, because after I was in Auschwitz and I was carrying these rocks one day, maybe the second, third day after being in Auschwitz, I saw a group of young children being taken from one place to another. My brothers were amongst this group. So I knew they did not go to the gas chambers immediately. So I was hoping they had survived. That's why I was so anxious to go home. When I came home, I was the first one to come back to my hometown, the first Jewish person to come back. My home, our home, was destroyed. My grandmother's home stood. It had windows and doors, but nothing else. It was totally empty. So I came in, and I made myself a home in my grandmother's home. I went at night, and I stole food off of the farm, and I got some straw to put on the floor, and I slept on the floor. But at that point, the house was empty. There were rats and mice. So the neighbors that we had knew I was back. I recognized my aunt's clothes that they wore, but no one came to me and said, are you hungry? Are you thirsty? No one came and no one acknowledged me. And so little by little, the train would stop and one kid would come from this family that survived, one from that family. They had no home. So we became, in my grandmother's home, we had commune living with all of the children that came. I knew my father was in America, but it was Herman Wise America. I didn't have an address, and so I didn't know how to get in touch with him. Until one day, one of the people from the post office came and told me, if I'm in the post office tomorrow morning at such and such a time, I would speak to my father. At that point, the entire town knew already that I was going to the post office. So they all came to listen to my conversation, and I thought that I had to shout to be heard across the ocean. The only thing was that I spoke in Yiddish. and say they couldn't understand. And so my father was able to arrange for me to get passage to come to this country.
Have you arranged to meet people that you either knew at either the slave labor camp or at Auschwitz? And what was that like, if you did?
You know, it was a strange thing that we, at that time, never talked about it. Mm-hmm. We never talked about what camp were you in, how was it for you, what did you do, and to this day I regret that I had one aunt that survived, not my Aunt Bella, but another, and I never spoke to her about this. We just couldn't. We couldn't speak to each other about this. And it was a different time, and it was difficult. And then I also got called under communism, where it became Czechoslovakia was divided, and part of it was Russia, and I got caught under that. And then someone paid to have me smuggled across the border so I could come here. So I've really had 3 lives, and
I'm counting 5 already.
yeah, well, I had life before, I had life during, I have life after, I have life today. I don't know what my 5th one is. Maybe it's still coming.
Do you ever read books about the Holocaust?
I do.
Is there, if you were to say,
I read about it, and if it's on television, I watch it. It's like you go back to the scene of your crime. I'm curious to know what is happening or what has happened to someone else. And we do talk about it here today. If a survivor comes, you know, I was in Auschwitz, I was in Birkenau, I was in Majdanek, and we talk about it here. But in those days, we didn't. It was too raw.
Fritzie, if you were to say, here are the 3 books you have to read, what would you say they were?
I don't know. I read Aaron's book recently. He's the one we just lost this week. He was our vice president here and was so involved in the museum. I read his book, and whoever hands me a book, I will read it, and I read a few pages, and then I put it away. And if something comes on television and things happen, I'll go, I don't know why they put that on. That never happened in a camp. That could never have happened. Some of it is fiction, some of it not. And it's this many years later, and I don't remember what I had for breakfast yesterday. But I can tell you what happened in the boxcar. But I don't remember the books. But yes, I am curious, and we do survivors do talk about it here today.
When I think about it, I've read a number of books. I can't read enough. I don't know what, Susan, your view is of the... But
what have you read?
The 3... Hey, Fritzie, there's one person that asks questions in this interview process. Okay? No, I'll give you the 3 books. I feel so close I can now say that to you. Okay. One is Primo Levi's book, The Descent of Man. And I think that's a fabulous book. Daniel Mendelsohn's Lost, The 6 of 6 Million, which he won the Pulitzer Prize. Obviously, Elie Wiesel's Night. I will tell you why I think the 3 books. One is Primo Levi's discussion about each stage of degradation into the camp, and the emergence out of that camp, and the reemergence and reuniting of himself with his humanity. Second, Mendelssohn's The Lost, is the story of 6 of 6 million, is a story of telling the story as he unravels. And his relatives did not die in the Holocaust or in a camp. They died. They were discovered and killed. And then, obviously, Night. So what would be your 3 books you have to read? These are the books you have to experience. What would you... Yeah,
those are terrific ones. I happen to also read the historical fiction versions, too, that give you a little bit sometimes of something else along with it. And so I would recommend on that genre, since you have covered some of the historical and biographies, I would add Nightingale, which seems, no matter who I recommend that to, that people are gripped by it. And it features a young female protagonist, not Jewish, who risks her life in a number of different ways to save Jews and to work against the nefariousness of the Holocaust. So that's one I would add for you.
You know, there's a set of questions I ask at the end of this interview that sound so frivolous, I'm going to skip them, but just for on the off chance at a later date, because usually it's about Chicago and it's really not appropriate to ask, which is, do you prefer the lake or the river, the Hancock or the Sears Tower, the Cubs or the Sox? Now you can hear me. Before you couldn't hear my question. Now you can hear me, Fritzie. That part you could hear. You prefer Cubs or Sox?
It's called selective hearing.
Yeah. It's called. From what I can tell, it's called motherhood. Okay. Okay. Cubs or Sox, Fritzie?
I'm sorry.
The Cubs or Sox?
Cubs, of course.
A woman after my own heart.
Cubs, of course.
Okay. Do you prefer thick or thin pizza?
I like both. I'm a pizza person. I like both.
Okay, what do you like on your pizza?
I like all cheese, and there's one now that Lou Melanati's makes with the less fat in the cheese. But I like everything on it. If there's pizza in my house, I get up in the middle of the night and eat it.
Wow. Do you like the Chicago Lake or the Chicago River? Do you have a preference?
I love the lake. I just to go to the lake, and my husband used to love going fishing. So yes, I love the lake.
And if you love architecture, do you think you like the John Hancock or the Sears Tower?
I like the Hancock. Okay. I like the Hancock.
I like you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Fritzie.
Thank you.
Thanks, Susan.